Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Qunqna No. 2 Honey Processed Ethiopia from Sey Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And Sey, based out of Brooklyn, New York, and they're a coffee roaster we featured a little more regularly on this channel this year, and that's for a number of reasons, including the fact that we've been really big fans of a lot of the coffees that they've come out with recently, including the Latte Tumaco, which, as it stands right now, is one of our favorite coffees of the entire year. Their coffees do tend to be a very specific sort of profile, kind of these lighter, washed, clean, floral, fruity cups of coffee, which is very much our flavor profile. And something that's been really nice about them is there's a coffee roaster nearby that's been carrying a lot more of their coffees, so we've had an opportunity to try a lot more of their coffees. And this one right here is a pretty interesting coffee, as we looked on their website and found out that this is the first ever honey processed Ethiopia that they've released. Just kind of surprising, but at the same time, almost all of their coffees that they do release are wash processed coffees. They will have a honey process from time to time, and it's extremely rare to see a natural process from Sey. So this one was going to be an interesting review. Regardless, this right here is day 32 of this coffee. And recipe we settled on for this coffee was a 16.671 water to coffee ratio at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. We will elaborate a lot on that later in this video. And we brewed it through the Chemex, and we've been asked to include a grind setting for this coffee. So this one is a medium grind, as it was done through the Chemex. They are a light American for the roast profile. And let's start discussing the coffee. Day 14, first impression, and they do say wait 2 weeks, and we know that we should probably wait even longer when it comes to Sey's coffees, and that was our first impression of this coffee. It was just okay. Plenty of citrus, slight bit of grain, typical for Sey on this first day, as there was so much potential in this cup of coffee, but you just knew it needed a lot more rest. Day 16, already a better cup of coffee, but still plenty of room for this coffee to improve, as we were getting a slight fleshy fruit characteristic and much more of this strong citric acidity, pretty common throughout the time drinking this coffee. Day 18, the coffee greatly improved from the first time we tried it, as it had a near geisha-like component to this cup of coffee, and that's going to be the theme of this video specifically, is this coffee had a lot of kind of geisha-light characteristics, as we will describe it. Pretty clean florals, a lively bit of acidity with some high fruit sweetness, clean and soft stone fruits as a whole in this cup. Pretty nice to this point. Day 21, since the coffee was finally starting to stride, we ran it through the V60, and the coffee was a lot more well-balanced, we would say. A little bit more body, a little less sweetness, a little less acidity, so it was just overall well-rounded, a little bit better, but we were losing a lot of the sweetness that we were experiencing, most notably the stone fruit sweetness. So that's why we liked the Chemex a little bit more for this coffee specifically, as we just really liked the sweetness that was coming out when brewed that way. Day 23, coffee was really hitting an impressive stride, as we were getting so many geisha-like characteristics from this coffee, which of course does include that kind of white flour clean base to the cup of coffee, and there is a wonderful amount of stone fruit that has increased in this cup of coffee over time. Love stone fruit, made it a really amazing coffee on day 23. Day 25, we upped the temperature, and this is what we wanted to discuss about the recipe. Is the most common recipe we've heard for Sey's coffees is a 17-to-1 at 208 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you do it that way, it really brings out so much of the acidity. And we know that Sey oftentimes is going for this really high acidity, as they're really light roasted coffees, and as a result, I don't necessarily enjoy it as much, as I really like the sweetness that comes out. There's a terrific balance of sweetness and acidity in so many of Sey's coffees that we find at those lower temperatures. That's why I personally tend to lean towards the lower temperatures for Sey's coffees, but we can kind of understand why some people might like this a little bit more. There's a secondary slight tropical fruit that was coming, but we were losing a lot of the stone fruits this way as well, and that's not a great trade-off for me. That's why I personally liked the lower temperatures a little more. Day 28 was by far the best day of the coffee we had experienced, which is saying a lot because the coffee had been really enjoyable to this point. Returned to the normal recipe, just radiating some fruit sweetness from start to finish. Initially a soft tropical fruit, but cools off and settles into a near kind of Fruit Loops-like cup. Wonderful. And then day 30, we were starting to see the coffee was finally starting to fall off, so we would definitely say that probably between days 18 and day 28 is when we were seeing the best of this coffee, as there was a little bit more acidity in the cup, while a lot of the delicate subtle fruits, especially the stone fruits, have died down ever so slightly, and it's a pretty citric cup of coffee. Experiencing the same here on day 32, as it's not quite as vibrant and enjoyable as it had been on previous days. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And we've kind of been saying geisha light, and this very much looks like kind of a geisha tasting wheel, as you have the cleanliness pretty high. You have the sweetness pretty high, the floral's pretty high, and then the citrus fruit and the stone fruit pretty high, as all of those are at level 4. The acidity is still pretty high at a level 3, and the finish at a level 3, so a lot of those things slightly more toned down than you might experience from geishas, but at the same time, this was a lot like the way a geisha tasting wheel would look. But let's see here what's really worth discussing. So the citrus fruit and the stone fruit, they seem pretty self-explanatory, as we've been discussing those a lot. The acidity, you know, you could, it's probably about a 3.5. You could even push that to a 4. And again, don't mind that as long as the sweetness is either equal to or higher than the acidity. That will always be a pretty decent trade-off. Floral's definitely pretty nice body at a level 1. So that's what we were saying about the kind of geisha-like component of this cup of coffee. That's probably the most notable part of that is it's a very super light-bodied cup of coffee, even for a honey-processed cup of coffee. See here, bitterness level 2, we always like to discuss the bitterness if it's on there, and that's going to be from the citric. It was a little bit of a citric bitterness, but honestly, I'm not sure that there's too much worth noting on this, as it's a pretty self-explanatory tasting well when you kind of go through the way we've been discussing this coffee to this point. All right, overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I mean, we've been kind of gushing about this coffee. It's a pretty good cup of coffee. Really enjoyed this cup of coffee, and I think the main thing I wanted to say about this is one of the questions we get asked the most, one of the questions we see the most in general is how do you drink Sey's coffees? Because Sey's coffees are hard, they're tricky, and I think this one has just kind of settled on what we've always thought. Just wait a lot. So wait until about, I don't know, 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks, and that's when the coffee will finally start improving. And no matter how you brew the coffee at that point, there's no secret recipe that's going to unlock this amazing cup of coffee. It's just from that 2.5 to 3 week period onwards that the coffee is going to be really nice, as the time we were experiencing, days 18 through day 28, wonderful cup of coffee. And it was the same thing with the Brazil earlier this year, wonderful cup of coffee. Now that Tumaco was a little bit of an exception because it was a geisha and that coffee was good throughout the time drinking it, but for the most part with their regular normal cups of coffee, that's just the best thing I can say, and I really enjoyed this cup of coffee. I think it'll have a hard time placing in the top 10, mostly because it's in the Ethiopia category, but this was probably one of the best kind of normal Ethiopian coffees, like nothing that wasn't necessarily a higher end geisha cup of coffee. This one would probably finish first as maybe my favorite just normal Ethiopia of the year, because it was a really good Ethiopia, and Sey continues to impress me. So we're going to be drinking more of Sey's coffees here, hopefully in the near future. We'll see how that goes. But type of person we would suggest this coffee to is anybody that is along those lines that we are, lighter bodied, lighter profiled, fruity, clean, sweet, floral, with a little bit of extra acidity. This is going to be our cup of coffee. Very easy, straightforward recommend on this one. But we would love to know your thoughts and impressions if you have by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or any of Sey's coffees, as we feel like Sey's a pretty popular coffee roaster as a whole. So many people do enjoy so many of their coffees for a number of reasons, including the acidity, the lighter profile, but we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of this coffee or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Qunqna number 2, honey processed Ethiopia from Sey Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.